Hi, I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach, from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, my loves. I am Laura Nichols, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour and let us help ignite your life with unfiltered motivation. So each first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific time, that's 9 a.m. for my Easterners, we'll be discussing some small but potent nuggets of truth from my book, Notes from Your Coach, to help you create the life that you want to be living. So today in this episode, we are going to talk about the transformative power of bold life pivots in your life. So we're going to spend some time getting to know me a little bit, with a candid exploration of how embracing change has led me to a more vibrant and fulfilling life, and also how I was crowned with the name Queen of the Pivot in the first place. So in this episode, we're going to discuss the challenges and triumphs of making major life shifts, like coming out later in life, changing careers, getting a divorce, unraveling religion, and starting a new business, just to name a few. And those are just some of my major pivots. There's plenty more out there for us to talk about. My clients have done a lot of major shifts on their own as well. So some of you might be thinking, like, what the heck is a pivot? Or I've never been through a pivot. And the reality is, pivots come every day in our lives. Pivots don't have to be these major life changes. Pivots come when there's, simply put, just a change in direction. So for instance, most recently, I have two teenage boys, and they, as you know about teenagers, they eat a lot. Sometimes they eat nothing, and sometimes they eat the whole house. I don't know how to explain it. So very recently, and this has happened a few times, I will make a meal. And because I'm busy, I'm a single mom, I cook with the hopes of having food for a couple of meals. And sometimes that can really cause an issue. So just last week, I made a meal, was so excited, did my cooking, knew that I wasn't going to need to do cooking for another day. And it was time to pull out the dinner for the second night, and it was gone. Those rascals had eaten the entire meal from the day before. And so what did I have to do? I had to pivot, right? I had to pull out a frozen pizza, or my favorite way to solve this problem is to have them fix it and say, okay, now you're cooking. And so that's just one example of a pivot that happens sort of on a regular basis. Or honestly, even just today, I was walking my sweet boy Baloo. He's my sweet dog. And he is a bully, meaning a pit bull bulldog mix. And he doesn't love the heat, and he doesn't love a long walk. He loves a walk. But once we get to a certain point, he kind of gasses out. Well, I was needing to walk also for exercise purposes as well. So at some point during the walk, he looked at me and he said, "Mom, I'm done." I had to make a pivot. I pivoted back to the house. I put him in the house, and then I kept walking, right? So we have small pivots in our lives every day. It could be something as simple as driving down the road, your normal way to work or the store, and hitting that orange detour sign. And all of a sudden you're going on a road you've never gone before, right? And so there's a certain amount of resilience and pivoting that happens on a regular basis. You might be at the store ready to get the ingredients for a meal that you're really excited about. And then all of a sudden they don't have the, I don't know, salmon that you were going to cook for dinner tonight. And you have to make a pivot. And so all a pivot is changing the direction on a day-to-day basis, and so you can make small changes, like pulling a pizza from the freezer, putting your dog away in the house, going down the road that you don't normally travel on. Or you can sit there and you can complain about it, which is what a lot of people choose to do. But life gets easier if you accept that pivoting is just part of, life and what you have to do on a regular basis. And then as we move forward into the show, we're going to talk about some of the bigger pivots, right? When you are a kid and your best friend moves away, right? This person that you spend your weekends having sleepovers with, your house is their house. They know where all the food in the pantry is, and all of a sudden they're gone, right? That's a major life pivot for a kid. Pivots happen at all stages of our lives. Some of them just occur naturally. For instance, you pivot when you graduate high school. A lot of the clients that I work with are teenagers and they're getting ready to leave high school and move into the college time. And that's a major life pivot. The world that they've known, the way they've operated from day to day changes drastically, right? Pivots come when we get married. We love this person so much. They're our world, but let's be honest. Going from living solo to living with a partner is a major life pivot. All of a sudden, you're not sure where your clothes go, where theirs go, who's doing the laundry, all of that thing. Major life pivots come when we change our careers, when we decide that we don't love what we're doing anymore, or if we get let go from a job. That's a major life pivot. Major life pivots come as we move through our life and decide the partner that we were with and maybe no longer the partner that we want to be with anymore, or just they don't fit anymore. And so we go through a divorce or some change there. Pivots come when a lot of pivots happened during COVID when people made the decision they wanted to move and end up somewhere else. And it was a really perfect time for people to make that pivot. And so moves are major pivots. Pivots come when kids leave the house and you become an empty nester. You've gone from raising these babies to toddlers to kids to now college kids and beyond. And all of a sudden they're sort of out of the house. Becoming an empty nester is a major life pivot that I deal with a lot with clients. Another one could be when you go into retirement. You've worked your whole life. You've sort of had this one career or two or multiple, but all of a sudden, you've decided that it's time to put your work life hat down and live the life of leisure. But that's not always the easiest pivot. Sometimes there can be things that come with that. And so pivots, I just really want to take the time to normalize that pivots are a major part of life. And if we can lean into them and we can really know that it's normal and use them for the power that they are, they can be massively important in our lives in order for us to create the life that we want to be living and living a life of alignment. So as we move forward, we're going to talk more about pivots. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I've been named the Queen of the Pivot. And we're going to get into it. So you're listening to Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to explore more about this awesome subject of pivots. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with myself, Laura Nichols, and today we're talking about the power of the pivot. But before we continue, I want to make sure you all know how to contact me if you're interested in knowing more about my work. You can find me on the show notes, or you can go to my website on notesfromyourcoach.com. I made it real easy for you. It's the same as the name. It's also the same as the book. So Notes from Your Coach. So I want to spend a little bit of time during this segment to talk a little bit about who I am, why I'm so passionate about pivots, and also how I got the name the Queen of the Pivot. So let's backtrack a couple years ago. So I was actually a school counselor for about 15 years, working with, teenagers during their major life pivot of being a teenager. So, it's a big transition, right? Going from childhood to adulthood, we have that really weird in between where kids are learning and growing very, very quickly. And I loved my job. I loved my kids. I called them all my own. I loved watching the changes. I didn't mind their quirkiness. I even loved middle school, which a lot of people can't necessarily say, but it's such a massive growth change. I really enjoyed watching them grow from that 6th to 8th grade perspective. So I was a school counselor for about 15 years, and that included up through COVID. Well, when we hit COVID, if you're in education or if you were a parent with a kid or you just were watching education from the outside, it was very difficult. We're scrambling, trying to figure out how do we support these kids? What does learning look like at home? When are we coming back in? When we do come back in, what does that look like? And as a school counselor, we're also supporting these kids who maybe have like food insecurity or maybe home is not the best place for them to be. And school was really sort of their vacation from that or their safe space. And so there was a lot of things that as a school counselor, I was trying to work with. So we kind of got through the hump of COVID, figured out to the best of our abilities, still wasn't great how to support these kids. And then we moved back into the school setting. Well, if you had kids or have kids who went to school, COVID and post COVID, you know that like we moved from a pandemic straight into a mental health epidemic. And what I mean by that is when we went back to school, no one was okay, right? Everyone had been through this massive, crazy thing, and it wasn't over. We're still trying to figure out what a new normal looks like. And my kids really struggled. I was supporting hundreds of kids with their mental health needs, plus the teachers, plus the parents, plus administration. And it started to take a toll on me. And so um, I didn't realize it at the time that I was headed into my own major life pivot. But what happened was I ended up really burning out. And so I took a leave of absence from my job for a minute because I hadn't taken care of myself. I hadn't taken my own clues of self-care and what I needed to do to support my own mental health. And so my doctor very sweetly said, Laura, it is time to take a break. And sadly, I had plenty of leave to cover my leave of absence, which just tells you so much about how hard I was working without taking care of myself. So when I came home and I spent about the first month sleeping, besides taking care of my kids, I started to think like, now what? Am I going to go back? What am I doing here? And so I had that moment of sort of rest and trying to take care of myself to realize that it was time for me to pivot. And so in that moment, I started looking into a couple different things and ultimately I experienced coaching. I had experienced coaching with actually, ironically, a burnout coach about a year before. And I witnessed it through a training program and I fell in love with it. And so I made the pivot and I decided I am going to dump myself into coaching, learn all about it, and really take the time to understand how it was different than counseling, and learn all about it and start this business. And so I pivoted and I ran and I dove into this business with the idea that I really wanted to help people be able to make these major life transitions. Now, why the pivot? Because that's not the only pivot in my life I've had. While I was starting my business, I also started doing guest podcasting. And one of the very first podcasts that I went on, having a guest on the podcast is great. I'm going to do it here eventually as well. But it's great to have that dialogue back and forth. And so she was asking me all these questions about my life and what I was doing and how I ended up where I ended up. And when I started explaining my life to her and sort of the things I had been to, she looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, you are really just the queen of the pivot." And I took that and I wore it like a badge of honor. And I said, yes, I am. And so let me talk a little bit about some of my major life pivots. So besides switching careers and starting my own business, when I was younger, I was very deeply into fundamentalist Christianity. And it worked for me when I was a teenager. And I was really good at it. I was good at doing what I was told. And I had been raised in a society, aren't we all, that teaches us how to people please and do the right thing. And so when I hit about 22, I started dismantling a lot of those beliefs and those religions. And that was my first major life pivot besides being a teenager. So I'll call this like sort of an extra one where my prefrontal cortex finally started developing and I realized that maybe the things that I had held on to as beliefs just weren't working anymore. Um, and it's interesting because this morning on my walk, I was listening to Bob Proctor, who wrote Change Your Paradigm, Change Your Life. And I listen to him often. And one thing that he says is that your perspective changes or your belief changes as you reevaluate the thing you're looking at. And that's so true. Once I was able to take a different perspective and look at what I was choosing to believe religiously, it really started changing everything for me. And so that was a really difficult pivot. I spent a long time in bed crying because I was undoing a lot of beliefs that I had really leaned on for a long time. So that was sort of my first major pivot. And then as I moved away from that, I went back to school and I sort of walked away from everything. I built this life around fundamentalist Christianity. I was in Bible studies. I was teaching them. I was in a Christian a cappella group. I lived in a house with fundamentalist Christians, and everyone was really confused. They didn't really know what to do with me. But one thing that I have started to learn about in my life is I'm just someone who can't really sit with something if it's not true for me anymore. And it doesn't work. It makes me really sick. And so that was my first major pivot. And then I ended up meeting um, my now ex-husband, and fell in love and got married and went ahead and got my master's degree in school counseling. And we started a family and was sort of like do on this really beautiful trajectory with all of my small pivots in life, right? That I talked about last segment. But as we moved on, we decided that we didn't want to raise our kids where we were anymore. We grew up in Northern Virginia and it was very expensive. And we just decided that we both needed to change. And so my next major life pivot, different than, I guess, getting married, was moving to North Carolina and finding a place where life could be a little bit more breathable. We moved here and I had to make the decision if I was going to work. We were both working full time. And ultimately, I went down to part time. And that was my next major life pivot, sort of letting go of this identity of being a Northern Virginian and what that looked like. And having to get my kids all situated. And if you've ever made a move with kids, you know what it looks like. It looks like getting them in, worrying about them, making sure that they get in school, make friends, get in activities, and really get settled. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, wait, but where am I and who am I now? And so part of that major life pivot and the overwhelm of it was sort of reinserting myself into my life. And what did that look like? So continue moving on. And I'm now working as a school counselor. We're loving life down here in North Carolina. And then right around 38, I realized that I was gay and I ended up coming out. And I met a woman and she led me to see all these things about myself. And that was my next major life pivot because I thought at 38, how do you not realize this about yourself? And I felt very overwhelmed and very confused and really struggled in the arena of where's the ground and where's the sky here, and not really my world spun a little bit, and pivots can do that for you. And so as I worked through that and who am I and what does this mean, ultimately it led to a divorce from my best friends. And that this was a really tumultuous time for me. And so a lot of what I do, why I do what I do is because I want to be the person that helps people through this fog, the overwhelm of these major life pivots. I know this isn't working for me, but I don't really know where I'm going or how to do what I need to do. It's a time when things can seem really overwhelming and you don't know where you're headed. And so I really wanted to be that person to hold someone's hand as they walk through it. And then ultimately, I left school counseling after COVID and decided to start this business. And I love the saying, if you want a fast track through personal development, start a business, because you are then faced with all of your things, right? There's things that we do really well. There's strengths that we all have. And there's things that maybe we don't do as well, that really we would benefit from someone teaching us or someone else doing completely. And when you start a small business and you are doing it on your own, we call it a solopreneur, you have to wear all the hats and you're really faced with dealing with the stuff that you're not good at. Maybe if like self-discipline is an area where you really struggle, you have to figure out what are you going to do to get the things done? In this world where we struggle to focus because of cell phones and social media and games and all of these things that have been created, focus can be an issue. You have to figure out how to dial in and what does it look like to step up in this business. And so, with all of that said, when she said, you really are the queen of the pivot, I said, you know what? I'm taking that and I'm going to wear that like a badge of honor because when you can pivot, um, you can be really powerful and recognizing that something's not working for you anymore and then choosing to go a different direction. I think that's one of the most beautiful gifts you can give yourself. You've taken the time to realize that something's not working. You've sat with yourself enough to be aware that something's got to give. And then you make a choice to make a change. And it's funny because when we're talking about pivots, pivots don't always feel good. Sometimes little pivots, maybe not a big deal. But very recently, a friend of mine had just moved out of her marital home and she was really empowered and feeling good. And we got her all situated in our house. And then about a week went by and she's like, I'm just feeling completely, like I don't know where I am. Like I'm feeling really lost. And I feel like there's a lot of emotions coming up. And I said, girl, you know what? Like big moves create big waves, right? And so you got to surf it and no one else knows where the water's coming from. They don't know if the water's coming from your eyes or the ocean, but either way, you just keep going. And then a couple of days later, she texted me and she's like, man, like this is a struggle. And she's like, things were really good. And now I'm really struggling with this. And I was like, yeah, because if you think of an ocean wave, those big ones, right? They pour the water onto the sand. And then what happens, right? The water gets pulled back off of the sand. So those big waves create big counter moves. And so it makes sense that the big life pivots would create such a tumultuous feeling and a lot of feelings of not knowing where you are and like what things are. And you can get tossed around the waves and not really understand exactly where you're at. And so, major life pivots are a passion of mine because they happen to all of us. And here's the other piece of it. Sometimes they happen and you didn't even ask for it, right? Sometimes you have a major life pivot where you make a choice and you're like, I'm going to do this thing. And sometimes a major life pivot comes and you're like, I didn't choose to be left by this other human. This other human has made this decision that they don't want me in their life anymore, right? Or somebody dies, right? That's another major life pivot that we don't choose and it just happens. And so then you get to answer the question, what am I going to do with this? And so I do what I do because I want to normalize major life pivots and I want to empower people in them to know that they have so much power in what they do and how they respond to it. And I think that that is another piece with these major life pivots is learning that you get to respond versus just react and what that looks like. And I wouldn't be where I am without all of these major life pivots. And I have a feeling that these things are going to continue. I just had another major life pivot dumped in my lap this past weekend. And yeah, I am ready for it. And I'm ready to help anyone else who is going through them and needs some support and an expert. So I am Laura, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about why people avoid pivots, kind of like the plague, but how to handle that resistance. So stay tuned and we will be right back. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, also known as the Queen of the Pivot, and we are talking about the power of the pivot and how pivots are such a powerful catalyst for creating the life you want to be living. So the question remains, if pivots are so powerful, why do people avoid them like the plague? And it's not a super complex answer because the reality is it really comes from fear. Fear is the thing that keeps us from doing a lot of things. And listen, I want to like normalize this because there's a reason that we have fear and a reason that fear keeps us from moving. So our brain, let's just talk brain biology for a second, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot. But our brain's job is to keep us safe and alive. If you think about everything it does in our bodies, right? It helps us breathe, it helps us move our muscles, it's telling all of our systems how to work. And it's doing all this because it wants us to stay alive, right? And so when you feel fear or of something big happening, it's your brain's way of telling you to stay safe. And this works if we're being chased by a bear. However, it doesn't take into account our happiness, right? And so we don't necessarily live in a world anymore where a mountain lion is going to come attack us. If, especially if you're living in the city or the suburbs, right? Maybe if you're living out in the woods. But what our brain deems as scary or life-threatening is very different than it used to. So our brains are wired to like not face the fear, right? We have fight, we have flight, we have fawn, we have freeze, right? All of these things that biologically we do instead of actually taking the action. So feeling fear with a major life pivot makes sense. So I want to normalize that because I think it's really important to know that there's no problem here. When a major life pivot comes and you just decide to ignore it, or you decide not to take action, that is normal and there is no actual problem. So the other piece that I think is really important to recognize is that fear is a feeling. It's not actually a truth, right? So fear comes from a thought that our brain gives us, or sometimes even a thought that we choose about a situation. And so we have a lot more power in the idea of how to face something than we actually realize. So common fears that are associated with these major life pivots, right? Can be something like fear of the unknown, like what is going to come. I am standing at the precipice and I don't know what is over the edge. I can't see it. It's either dark or foggy, or I don't know what lies ahead of me. So it reminds me of a time when I was in college. My friends and I went to this quarry and, we were teenagers still. So we thought we were supermen and superwomen. So we went to this quarry. The quarry was filled with water. It was a place that you went to and people would like jump in the water. So here we go, hiking up to the top, and we get there and, one by one, my friends are like jumping into the water. Everyone's having a great time and they are in the water swimming. And then it's my turn. And I'm standing at the edge of this rock looking down below. And y'all, I cannot move. I am at the place where I am terrified. I can feel the fear coursing through my body. I am completely frozen in this respect. And I just stood there trying to will myself to jump over this cliff, right? My hands are shaking. I feel like I want to throw up. My friends have all already done it. They're all in the water enjoying themselves, splashing around, and frankly, probably getting a little annoyed at me in this process because we actually had place to go and people to see at this point. My friends were musicians. One of them had a concert that they needed to get to, and I'm standing there unable to move. And they're all just waiting for me down at the bottom in the water. And so I can still feel this situation. This was 20 some years ago at this point, and I feel like it was yesterday. And so the fear of the unknown and what's coming below, all I could think was that there was a rock that was going to be there, right? Like that there was something that was going to harm me. It's very real. And I want to normalize that. Every single major life pivot that you have has this fear of the unknown. Because when you pivot, you're going somewhere that you've never been before, right? And so the questions are, what is going to happen? Like where, like what's on the other side of this? And getting over that hump of like the unknown can be really difficult. And here's the other thing, like people always want to be the courageous one. Um, we root for these heroes in the movies, the superheroes that make the decision to fight the, I don't know, monster, right? And we're like, yeah, go get that monster. But then when it comes time to be courageous ourselves, we don't realize that the other side to courage is that it's just doing something when you're fearful. And so it doesn't feel good. Courage is not this amazing feeling because all it means is that you're taking action, but you're still scared while you're doing it. And feeling fear doesn't feel good. It just doesn't because your brain is telling you all of these reasons not to do something. So a couple other things. So we have the fear of the unknown, right? Major life pivots also can come with the fear of failure, right? There's a possibility that you're not going to succeed at this major life pivot. And that can be paralyzing. It causes, massive paralysis and you don't move. So the fear of failing and having to face consequences will keep people stuck in a situation for a long time. Think about all of the things you've thought, I want to do. I was just talking to a friend yesterday, and she was like, wow, I've always wanted to start this business. I've always wanted to take this step. I've always wanted to go back to school and do this thing. But what if it doesn't succeed? What if I end up making less money? I end up making no money. I end up not being able to support myself. Those are all very real and valid fears. When I first left school counseling, and I had a steady paycheck. I knew where my money was coming from. I knew that if I had a bad day as a school counselor or a good day, I was still going to get paid. And I knew how to do my job. I knew how to be successful in that. But when I stepped into being a business owner, I had no idea what I was doing. Coaching, super easy. It's very close to school counseling. In a lot of ways, I feel like I am still a school counselor. So the coaching piece was not difficult for me. That came very naturally. However, starting a business, I had no idea what I was doing, right? I was terrified that I was going to run out of money and make some massively stupid decision. And I had to face that. So all major life pivots come with that fear of possible failure. Another fear that comes and keeps people paralyzed and keeps them from taking these major life pivots is regret, right? They worry that they might make the wrong decision and regret it later. That's a powerful deterrent that keeps you from doing something. So this is the fear that often leads us into overthinking and also just not taking action. When I was coming out later in life, and ultimately my then husband and I had to decide sort of what we were doing with our relationship and what that was going to look like. I was really scared that I was going to regret my decision, right? That deciding to be authentically me and deciding to try to create a life that was in alignment with who I was, that I was going to end up somehow regretting that. And that maybe my life was going to be terrible afterwards, right? Like I had like such a great life, right? We had created this beautiful world where it essentially was a white picket fence without having one, right? I was working part-time, I had plenty of leisure time. We had created a world where there was enough money to do the things we wanted to do, vacations, working out, getting massages, right? Like I was very, very, very privileged in that. And so knowing that that was very possibly not going to be the case when I had to recreate this life on my own, there was a huge fear of regret in that. Like what ifs often live in this part of the fear, right? The fear of regret. What if I'm not happy? What if I can't make it on my own? What if my kids hate me for choosing to live authentically? Or what if I lose everyone in my life? Like, what if I ultimately end up regretting it? And so that fear of regret can really keep people from taking action and making a major life pivot that they need to make to live happily. But with that said, if you don't take the action, there's no way to find the happiness. And in order to live authentically and create the life you want, you have to face this fear of possible regret, or you're just going to be unhappy anyway. So at least choose the action that's going to lead you to the life you want rather than sitting in regret in the other way, right? Another fear that people really face when they're looking at a major life pivot is the loss of control, right? A major life pivot can make people feel like they're losing control over their lives, right? Especially if it's a major life pivot that they're being sort of forced into. But one thing that I love to think about is the fact that we don't actually ever really have control anyway, right? Like, and I really learned this when I had kids. You have this idea that you have control over life, and then you have these babies who sleep when they want, eat when they want, have their own little autonomy even as babies as far as like their needs and wants. And like you really don't have the control anyway. We have circumstances and we make choices based on that. And so the fear of losing control, while very normal, it's kind of fake because we really don't have all this control anyway. So, you know, when, for instance, if you're going through a breakup, right? Like all of a sudden you feel like you're losing control of this relationship that you had. But the reality is you were never in control because there was always another person there, right? There's always another person also making decisions for them. One big fear that people have over major life pivots is also like this fear of judgment. So you have this concern about what other people are going to think or what they're going to say, right? You're feeling fear of being misjudged or misunderstood from either your loved ones or society as a whole. When I made the decision to walk away from my church, I was really scared about the judgment that was going to come from that. Were people going to understand me? I had built this whole world. Was I going to lose everybody? And ultimately, I did lose the majority of the people that I had created my life around. But what I realized in that is that it didn't matter because I was choosing me and what was right for me in that moment. And so that fear of judgment ended up not being as big of a deal as I thought it was going to be. Another fear that people face with a major life pivot is fear of financial instability. Money makes us do a lot of things, including not take inaction, right? Financial security is a common concern during major life changes, especially when it involves like a career shift or moving or a divorce or anything that's going to shake things up financially. We live in a world where we've created the idea that money sort of is what we need to live. And so we do have a certain amount of financial security that is needed to get through this life. And so the fear of not having enough can really hold people back from making the decision they want to make. So when I left school counseling, and again, I had this paycheck that was coming in monthly, and then I was faced with, I don't know where the money's coming from, right? I'm just putting faith in the fact that I'm doing my purpose and I'm helping people with my whole heart, and that I'm going to be blessed in that way and that money's going to come, right? Another fear that people face is the loss of identity. Major life changes can challenge your sense of yourself. I'm going to change that. They do challenge your sense of yourself, right? Whenever you go through a major life pivot, you have to take a look at yourself. There's no way to get through a major life pivot without doing that. And so a lot of people fear losing who they are, what they've built, especially if your identity is really tied to your current situation. One of my clients, for instance, was leaving one career and going into another. And she really struggled with the loss of being tied to her old career. When I left school counseling, it was a little disconcerting not to be able to call myself a school counselor anymore, because that was such a big part of who I was. When I went through my divorce, there was a lot of loss around not being a wife anymore or not having a husband. When you create an identity around a life circumstance, and then that life circumstance changes, whether it's by choice or not, right? That fear of losing your identity is palpable. Another fear that we face with a major life pivot is fear of disappointment, right? That we're going to let down our people, right? Society, family, friends, colleagues, right? Can create a fear. We don't want to disappoint people. We live in a world of people pleasing. And so you may worry about letting other people down if our change that now aligns with us no longer aligns with somebody else. When I came out, I my parents are amazing and they were so supportive. I was actually more afraid to tell them that I was getting a divorce than I was to tell them that I was gay. And so just the fear of disappointing them, they've been married for 50 plus years at this point. And so I felt a lot of fear of disappointing them. Another major fear that comes with major life pivots is a fear of loneliness, right? Major life pivots can lead to isolation or a loss of a support system. So you might fear that you end up alone or without a strong community, and that can be a really significant obstacle. All of my major life pivots came with the fear of loneliness. And then ultimately, in all of them, there was some loneliness because I was shifting all of my support systems. When I walked away from church, I had created this world where I was being supported by other believers, other people within the church. And so when I left, I didn't really have anyone to lean on. When I came out and was getting a divorce, I lived in in a world that was small. I lived in a world where I was working in my community and I lived in my community and our world was always sort of right here. And so I had to find a new support system. I had to find new people to get through this major life pivot with. And then also, when I became a business owner, it is lonely. It's a lonely job, right? So you have to find other people who are going through similar things and recreate the support system. I no longer had my fellow school counselors or my administration or my teachers to lean on as I was trying to muddle through what this looked like to create a business. And ultimately, this is going to sound like a funny one, but it's actually very common. Another fear that keeps people from taking action in a major life pivot is the fear of success, right? Sometimes the fear of actually succeeding in the thing can be just as strong as the fear of failure, right? Because success can also bring new responsibilities and expectations, and it brings new challenges that you didn't aren't necessarily prepared for. And so sometimes, more times than we actually like to admit, it's actually the fear of success that keeps us rooted and not moving and not wanting to pivot. And so all of these things keep us from moving. But on the flip side, there are some really amazing reasons. And I really want to get to why pivoting can be so transformational. So that's what we're going to do in the next segment. I'm Laura Nichols, and I'm here with you on Notes from Your Coach. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we get back, we're going to talk all about the triumphs and successes and the power that comes from major life pivots. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. All right, this is Laura Nichols, Queen of the Pivot with Notes from Your Coach, and we are back. And now we get to get into the exciting part, right? What makes a pivot so powerful? And we are going to be talking about that to help motivate you to be courageous and make some of those changes that you are ready to make. So let's get into it. So when we're talking about pivots, one of the things that makes them so powerful is that they're such a catalyst for growth. So growing comes when we are uncomfortable. I know it sucks, but that's just how it is. Things that make you change are also the things that don't feel great. I want you to think about for a second about going to the gym, right? We go to the gym and we lift weights, or you should, especially if you're a woman over 40. It's one of the most important things you can do. We'll get into that in another show. But that resistance that you're creating with your muscle is so important, because that resistance is what actually creates your muscle to get stronger. So the more situations that you put yourself in to be resilient, the more resilient you are going to be. There is just no way to do it without going through it. And I was actually thinking about that this morning when I was preparing for this podcast. And I was thinking about sometimes in my life, I sort of allow small pivots to happen on a regular basis, because I'm a big believer that allowing that to happen and recognizing that pivots are just a part of our life is what keeps my pivot muscle active and strong. That might sound silly, but it works for me. So, when I drop a glass on the floor, my first thought originally may have wanted to be like, some curse word. But now that I've done a lot of work in this arena, typically it's something like, oh man, now I'm going to have to like figure out how to do this with one less glass, or, oh, should have held the glass, not with wet hands. And so I really try to lean into the small pivots that happen on a regular basis, because the more that you use the muscles, the bigger and stronger they come. So I also like to think about it sometimes as like a seed, right? So I love gardening. I'm in my yard all the time. I love planting seeds. And I think about how the seeds, in order for the plant to be strong, these tiny little seeds have so much power in them, and the water and the warmth and ultimately the light allows them to grow and push through the soil to become this beautiful, magnificent plant. But if it didn't have the pressure of the soil to push through, it would not be nearly as strong as it ultimately has to be. And so pivots create a massive catalyst for growth, and they can make us so, so strong. So for instance, just in my own life, before I started my business, I had gone through this divorce. I was learning what it meant to live on my own for the first time and take care of all my bills, all of them alone for the first time, and really understanding. And I was so panicky, when it came to money and being able to pay my bills and figuring out what that looked like. And then even after I hadn't figured out my sort of money story, I still decided to start this business. And let me tell you, you have got to deal with your money story in your head if you go to open a business. And there's a lot to unpack there. But the only way for me to sort of undo all of the money things I had learned and the things that weren't working for me was to go through it. And so starting my business and having to push through a lot of the lessons that I had learned, that I had carried on without realizing it, that I had surrounding money, the only way for those to change was to actually go through it. And so major life pivots are such a catalyst for growth and building those muscles. So I would encourage you to really lean into the idea that growth comes when you go through the hard thing. So another thing that a major life pivot can do is it's like a declaration of you being in charge of your life story, right? It's when you step into that main character energy, right? Who am I? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to show up as? And I'm going to allow all of those other little voices of all those people, I'm going to let them be side characters, because in my life, I am the main character, and what I want and what I need, that is my job. My job is not to worry about all these other side characters. And so when you go through a major life pivot, like for instance, when I came out and I'm making a declaration that my authenticity and who I am and living my life in alignment is ultimately the most important thing. For a lot of reasons. I had to get there by way of knowing that it was good for my kids in the end, but being able to claim that that was important to me, man, that put me in charge of my own story, right? It's about making decisions that align with your values, your desires, your goals, rather than being stuck in a path that just doesn't serve you anymore, right? Your mental health comes when you follow your heart and your purpose. And so when you're not living in a life that's in alignment of you and you are living for somebody else's ideas, right? You're giving away your main character energy to somebody else. You're saying they're in charge. It's their energy that matters. What kind of life is that, right? When you choose a major life pivot, you empower yourself to create a life that you truly want rather than sort of passively accepting a life that you have been given or has been sort of chosen through you. And sometimes it takes some time to realize that. We may be walking down a path that we didn't realize was given to us by somebody else. And when you see that and when you feel that, you can't unfeel it, right? You have to be able to get to a place where you see what you want and then you make that decision. Another amazing thing about a major life pivot is that it opens up new opportunities, right? You can't get new results if you keep doing the same things over and over again. So by really stepping into that pivot and changing your trajectory, it opens up so many new possibilities, right? Life can be monotonous. It can be stagnant, right? This is the same reason why when people go through breakups, they end up taking on new hobbies, right? They try new things. You know, a lot of times when people get divorced, all of a sudden the ex-husband is mountain climbing and they've never done that before, right? Or you might try a painting class because when you have a major life pivot, it allows you to see things from a different perspective. And so it allows you to try things that you haven't tried before. And it breaks up the monotony. It sort of like takes your Lego house and like rips it apart. And then you have all these Legos and now you get to rebuild something new. And so it really takes that. It breathes new life into a life that may have been a little bit stagnant before. So I think so many times back to major life pivots, and I think, wow, this never would have happened if. So even in my business journey, the people that I've met in the last, couple of years, I never would have met if I hadn't have taken this time to follow the path and change my trajectory. And I wouldn't even be doing this podcast. I wouldn't have written a book. And so making the decision to face the fear and change the pivot or take the pivot really opens up so many new possibilities. So another thing that major life pivots do is they encourage other people to make bold decisions, right? Like, what does it look like to take a bold step in your life? How could it impact you and then impact others? You know, one of the most beautiful things that has happened to me in the last couple of months is to hear my 16-year-old tell me how proud he is of what I've done and that he has watched me build this business from scratch and write a book, a tangible book that wasn't there before. And the clients that I've worked with and he's my biggest cheerleader. And so knowing that by me taking the time and the intention and overcoming the fear and creating something new, taking that major life pivot, shifting is then going to sift down and inform maybe some of his choices. I don't think there's anything more beautiful than that. So let's talk a little bit about what you should do if you're thinking that you're ready for a major life pivot. Major life pivots are hard. They can be scary. They can seem really foggy. But I also want you to think about where you currently are and if you are living a life that is in alignment of where you want to be at the moment. So what should you do if you are ready to make a major life pivot? So get out your journal, or if you're not a writer and that's really something that you don't want to do, another thing you can do is to get out your phone and record yourself, record the answers to these questions. Or a third option, I'll give you another one, is to find someone to talk to you about this. But there's a couple questions that you really need to ask yourself, right? What areas of your life are calling for a pivot? It doesn't have to be big. It can be small. We're not talking about leaving a spouse or leaving a career, right? It can be as small as changing up your go-to look for going out. I don't know. So what areas of your life are calling for a pivot? Where are things stagnant? What might need a little bit of a change? Okay. Two, second question. What fears are holding you back from making a change? I went through a whole list of them. If you need a refresher, go back and listen. But what fears are holding you back from making a change? Is it fear of failure, fear of success, fear of judgment, right? What's keeping you from doing it, right? And then let's write that down and address it, okay? Three, who can you reach out to for support and guidance during a major life pivot? I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have support when you are going through something. You are not alone. And that is the reason that I do what I do, right? Major life pivots can be scary and foggy and overwhelming and keep you, frankly, want to stay in a cave, right? Who can you reach out to as you're going through this? Who has done it before? Who is somebody who you admire who's done a big thing, right? And then also, side note, this might be the time to let go of the people who really don't get it, right? Who have never opened a business, who have never left a spouse, who have never moved, right? Those are not your go-to people in this moment, right? Your go-to people are the ones who support major life changes, are ones who have done the big things, the scary things, are the ones who believe in personal development and have done their work, right? These are your people who you are wanting to level up and stand next to, okay? Fourth question, what small steps can you take today to move closer to your desired change? You don't have to be at the cliff and jump into the water below like I did 20 some years ago, right? Some people need a small step. In fact, looking back, I had a small step. Looking back, I didn't just leave my job. About 6 months to a year before I actually left school counseling, I hired a burnout coach. And I didn't even connect the dots until later, but I had took a small step before I even realized I did. And that is a little bit about how our brain works, right? Our subconscious sort of makes choices before our conscious brain actually does. So think about what small steps you can take today to move closer to your desired change. What major life pivot do you want? And what small step can you make today to move towards that? I want to highlight again how important it is to have a support network. You know, find mentors, right? Find allies during transitions. When I was first coming out, when you come out at 38, and I can get more into this on another episode, but it seems like there's something wrong and it's very lonely. And not until I found a community of people who were going through something similar did I realize that I wasn't alone. And so finding someone to lean on who is going through or has gone through or is an expert in change can be the game changer for you, right? It can make things so much easier, and it can also speed up the process. It's why people reach out to me for coaching. So if you're interested and you are looking for some coaching around a major life pivot, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here. It's what I do. It's what I'm here for. So, you know, as you step back into your human journey from the show, just remember this week's Unfiltered Motivation. The power of the pivot, you know, pivot boldly, live fully. You know, you've got this. In case you need a reminder, you are a badass. So keep rocking it. And until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and always remember the power of the pivot. If you want to contact me, you just need to go to my website, Notes from Your Coach. All my info is on the contact page. And you can also sign up for my newsletter there. I can't wait to see you. Until next time. Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more Notes from Your Coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on the tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.